The first time Ari Shah Vance realized she had been abandoned, it wasn't because the room was empty. It was because no one bothered to look her in the eyes anymore. The machines hummed softly around her, expensive, cutting edge, the kind only money could buy. The walls of her penthouse hospital suite were lined with glass, reflecting a skyline she once owned, a city that had once whispered her name with admiration and envy. Now, those same reflections showed a motionless woman confined to a bed, her body unresponsive, her voice stolen by a cruel twist of fate. Once the most powerful billionaire in the region, Ari Shah was now reduced to silence, her existence acknowledged only by nurses who rotated shifts like clockwork, never staying long enough to care. If stories about kindness, redemption, and second chances mean something to you, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Heartfelt Stories. You never know whose life a simple act of kindness might change. Before the accident, Ari Shah Vance had been unstoppable. She built empires from dust, turned failing companies into global giants, and made decisions that shaped industries. Her presence alone commanded rooms, and her sharp mind made billion-dollar deals seem effortless. But power, she had learned too late, was a lonely throne. The people around her had been drawn not by love, but by influence, wealth, and ambition. And when the accident came, a late-night crash on a rain-slick highway, it stripped everything away in a single, unforgiving moment. She survived. But survival, in her case, came at a cost far worse than death. Paralyzed from the neck down, unable to speak, relying on machines and minimal facial movement to communicate, Ari Shah became a burden in the eyes of those who once depended on her. Her business partners quietly distanced themselves, citing uncertainty. Her distant relatives argued over control of her assets, while avoiding responsibility for her care. Even the private caregivers assigned to her rotated frequently, unwilling to endure the emotional weight of tending to someone who seemed, to them, already gone. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The city outside moved on, alive and indifferent, while Ari Shah lay trapped in a body that refused to obey. Her mind remained as sharp as ever, a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. She watched silently as people entered her room, performed their duties, and left without a second glance. No one spoke to her as a person anymore. They spoke about her, around her, but never to her. Hope, once a driving force in her life, slowly began to fade. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. The door opened, and instead of the usual clinical efficiency, there was hesitation. A man stood at the threshold, holding the hand of a small child. He looked out of place in the polished, sterile environment. His clothes were simple, slightly worn, his posture uncertain but steady. The child beside him clutched a small toy and peered curiously into the room. This was Zaid Rahman, a man who had never imagined his life would intersect with someone like Ari Shah Vance. Zaid was a single father, raising his 6-year-old daughter Alina after losing his wife to illness years earlier. Life had not been kind to him. He worked multiple jobs, anything he could find, to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. His days were long, his nights restless, but he carried on for one reason alone: his daughter. When a friend mentioned a high-paying caregiving opportunity, one that required patience more than experience, Zaid hesitated. He had no medical background, no training, and no connection to the world of the wealthy. But the pay could change everything for him, and Alina, it could mean stability, a chance to finally breathe. So he showed up. The staff had been skeptical. What could a struggling single father possibly offer to a case as complex as Arish's? But desperation had lowered their standards, and no one else had stayed long enough to matter, so they let him try. From the moment Zaid stepped into the room, something shifted. He didn't see a billionaire. He didn't see a burden. He saw a human being. He approached slowly, kneeling slightly so his gaze aligned with Arish's. His voice, when he spoke, was gentle, steady, and filled with sincerity she had not heard in months. He introduced himself, not with formality, but with warmth, as if meeting an old friend rather than a patient. He spoke to her, not about her, describing his day, his struggles, even his fears. It was awkward at first, uncertain, but it was real. And for the first time since the accident, Ari Shah felt seen. Days turned into weeks, and Zaid kept coming back. He learned her routines, her needs, the subtle ways she communicated through her eyes. He read to her, not from business reports or news articles, but from simple stories, sometimes even the ones he read to Alina at night. He spoke about life outside the glass walls, about the smell of rain on dry streets, about the laughter of his daughter, about the small, beautiful moments that made life worth living. Alina, at first shy, began to visit more often. She would sit beside Arisha, telling her about school, her drawings, her dreams. She didn't see the paralysis, the machines, or the silence. She saw a friend, and something miraculous began to happen. Arisha's eyes, once dull with resignation, began to light up. Her responses grew more deliberate, more engaged. The doctors noticed subtle improvements. Small, almost insignificant signs that hinted at something greater. But what they couldn't measure was a shift happening within her. The return of something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. Zaid never treated her like a broken person. He challenged her, encouraged her, spoke to her as if she could overcome anything. And slowly, she began to believe it. But not everyone was pleased with this change. Behind the scenes, those who had benefited from Arisha's silence began to grow uneasy. Her prolonged condition had allowed them to make decisions, to control aspects of her empire without interference. The possibility of her regaining even partial control threatened everything they had quietly taken. Whispers turned into plans. And danger, subtle but real, began to creep into the edges of her world. Zaid sensed it before he could fully understand it. The sudden changes in staff behavior, the hushed conversations, the documents that appeared and disappeared without explanation. He didn't have proof, but he had instincts sharpened by years of surviving in a world that rarely gave second chances. He became more vigilant, more protective, not just as a caregiver, but as someone who had come to care deeply for the woman everyone else had written off. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the room, something extraordinary happened. Arisha managed to move her finger, just slightly, barely noticeable, but undeniable. Zaid saw it. His heart raced, his breath caught, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. It was the beginning of a fight, a transformation, and a story no one had expected. Months passed, and with relentless determination, Arisha's condition improved. It was slow, painful, and uncertain, but it was progress. Each small victory felt monumental. Each movement, each response, each flicker of regained control was a step toward reclaiming her life. And through it all, Zaid remained by her side. Not for the money, not for the opportunity, but because he believed in her, because he saw her. As Arisha regained more control, so did her awareness of everything that had been happening around her. The betrayal, the manipulation, the quiet attempts to erase her presence from her own empire. And with that awareness came a fire, one that had built empires before and would do so again. But this time, she wasn't alone. The final confrontation wasn't loud or dramatic. It was calculated, precise, and inevitable. With Zaid's help and the evidence they had gathered, Arisha began to reclaim what was hers. One decision at a time, one truth at a time, she dismantled the web that had been spun around her. And when she finally spoke again, her voice weak but unwavering, it sent shockwaves through everyone who had underestimated her. She had returned, but she was no longer the same woman. Wealth no longer defined her. Power no longer consumed her. What mattered now was something far more valuable. Connection, humanity, second chances. Zaid never asked for anything in return. He never expected his life to change. But Arisha ensured it did, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. She gave him and Alina a future he had only dreamed of, not as charity, but as a partnership, a bond forged through hardship and compassion. And in doing so, she found something she had never truly had before. A family. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness can change lives in ways we never expect, take a moment to comment and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And before we close, here's something special for you. Drop a comment saying kindness still exists if you believe one person can make a difference in someone's life. Because sometimes the people the world overlooks are the very ones who bring it back to life. And sometimes all it takes is one person to care, to change everything.